Delta G Squadron better than ISA? I'm assuming you mean E Squadron because, and it's been a hot second, but G Squadron is their aviation squadron. E Squadron is their intelligence squadron. And it's possible I could be getting these backwards. It's been a hot second, and I am slightly retarded. But so they do different things, right? Is it awesome for intelligence operators or operatives to have a tactical background as good as a Delta operators? Absolutely. But having said that, even Delta's intelligence squadron, which when you combine all the resources and the awesome environment that is Delta Force, and you combine it into doing some cool intelligence, it's a great combination. But that squadron's mission is limited, right? They can only do missions that are within the scope of the unit, which is usually not as big as ISA. So ISA's mission, like Delta's intelligence squadron, is usually doing intelligence related to missions that the ISA or that Delta's doing directly. ISA not only does it support some jsoc units, it also is it's covering intelligence throughout the world, right? And a lot of intelligence is being in places before we need to be there. For example, let's take Venezuela and Maduro. There were intelligence operatives in Venezuela years prior to this operation, setting up for this operation, right? So Delta does not have the resources and the manpower to do everything that Delta does, and then also do the intelligence to support their mission specifically, and also go around the world and sit in places we don't need to be yet years in advance, right? They definitely do some of that, but they don't do it to the scale that ISA does, right? So think of it like how the CIA is in places already, just constantly doing operations. Obviously, ISA is like the military version of that. They're out there in places prior, right? That's probably one of the biggest differences, and I hope that helps and that makes sense. You should keep getting it on podcasts and tell your story. Once you know, people become a fan. Yeah. Well, if people invite me, to be honest, I haven't really reached out to anybody other than people that have reached out to me. I just haven't done that yet. I think the only person that I reached out to, and I'll tell you this, of all YouTubers in the world, I am a fangirl from one specific YouTuber, and he's not military. I did reach out in one email to let Chris Williamson. I think Chris Williamson is like the coolest, like modern day philosopher, one of the greatest modern day philosophers of our time. And I just am addicted to listening to Chris Williamson. If you have not listened to Chris Williamson, yeah, that's my boy. Like, that's my dream, right? Even more so than like Sean Ryan, even Joe Rogan. Be on a Chris Williamson show is my dream, to sit and have a one-on-one conversation with that man. That's where I want to be. So what is your opinion of ISA versus Mossad? And also, what's your overall opinion of Israel? Are you for them or against them? Oh man, what a loaded question. Oh, all right. Well, let's get into this. All right. So, what's your overall opinion of Israel? All right. So, if you've ever been to Israel, right, and you've dealt with the Israeli people in Israel, right? You've seen the Israeli military, you've worked alongside them. It's hard not to like them, right? Because when you meet, like, the Israeli people are so patriotic, right? And I say this, the Israel people who live in Israel, right? There is a difference between Jewish people who live in America versus Jewish people who live in Israel, right? It's a very different political spectrum. The people that live in Israel, they are so patriotic. Obviously, they have their conscription programs, and everybody has to serve. But because of that, right, one of the added benefits to a conscription, and also a conscription, a country that has a conscription, but also is very patriotic, is that everybody understands what you're doing. Like when you're in the military, anybody you talk to, you can honestly automatically relate to, right? Unlike in the United States, which we are, people who serve in the military are 1% of the population. You think about that. For every 100 people you meet, only one person knows your experience. And that's very interesting, right? And then, Israel, if you try to look at things, and obviously you need to look at things from everybody's point of view, not just Israel's, but the people who don't like Israel. Israel does things for right or for wrong because they believe they are fighting for survival. They're under this existential threat. So they take things to a certain extent because they believe it's life or death, right? We, as the United States, don't have that threat, so we can operate within a certain we operate in a different core set of values, if that makes sense. Obviously, culturally a little bit different, but also geopolitically, geographically, in a lot of different ways, we are awarded a lot of privileges that allow us to basically not do some of the things that Israel does that pisses people off, right? So I think that Israel has some good intentions, but definitely Israel and I know this because I've dealt with Israeli intelligence services. I've done operations are in proximity or alongside them. And like all our allies, right? But Israel specifically, everybody needs to be watched like a hawk, right? We're friends now, right? And we probably will be friends for a long time. But I personally think is I don't really trust anybody, and I definitely don't trust necessarily the Israeli intelligence service. Look, everybody spies on everybody. If you don't think that that's the case, you are sadly mistaken, and welcome to the real world, my friend. Everybody spies on everybody. We spy on everybody. They all spy on us, right? Washington D.C. is like the capital of the world of spies, right? Most countries, all their diplomats are spies, right? So DC, like everybody's doing intel on everybody, right? All the embassies here are doing intel on us. We're doing intel on them. They're doing intel on other people. It's just crazy, right? Like DC is it's kind of nuts when you really understand what's going on from an intelligence and a counterintelligence point of view. The city's fucking nuts. There's no other city in the world like this. Will I criticize for mistakes that Israel makes? Absolutely. I'm not afraid to do that, right? Do I think generally they do a lot of things that coincide with things that we want? Typically, right? But I definitely do think that they kind of overstep their bounds sometimes. And they have to remember that we're the big brother, and we need to put them in their place sometimes. But like, hey, calm down. It's like a dog, easy, right? I'm not calling Israeli people dogs. All right, don't come at me. Don't clip that shit. But you know what I'm talking about. And then go back to your other question. What's your opinion of the ISA versus Mossad? This is a very similar conversation to ISA versus CIA. And I'll explain why. The biggest difference between the ISA and the CIA is authorities. ISA operates under the Department of Defense, or the artist formerly known as the Department of Defense, now is the Department of War. There is something that's known as Title 10 and Title 50 authorities. You guys can look them up. I'm not necessarily going to go into, I'm just, because I'll go off on a tangent, but the CIA has more leeway to do certain things that the military can never get away with. For example, if anybody knows, every Tuesday in the White House, there's a meeting where the president and a number of high cabinet officials get together with the intelligence agencies, and specifically the CIA, and they review a kill list. They do this I think it's every Tuesday or Thursday. I'm getting old. I think it's every Tuesday. This kill list is who the United States wants to eliminate. It is not handed to the military, and there is a reason for that. It is not given to Delta. It is not given to SEAL Team 6, because a lot of these people on the list, like, for example, Osama bin Laden, the military has the authorities to kill him, right? There are other people that we want to get rid of that the military does not have authorities to get rid of. The CIA can do that, right? So they have more authorities because they, for a number of different reasons, they have the access ability. Because of Israel's culture, because of Israel's culture, because Israel believes in its existential crisis and has a stomach to commit operations that the United States might be a little, hey, we won't go that far. Israelis will do that, right? We as the United States military are one of the only militaries who actively will go out of our way to avoid civilian casualties. And I can draw a couple parallels to this, right? But Israel is not exactly, doesn't follow the same playbook, right? Because of their thoughts of their existential crisis, or whatever you want to call it, right? They are have more of an appetite, or more acceptable to collateral damage, right? And I'll give you guys an example of this specifically, and I will compare England, the United Kingdom, and the United States during World War II. During World War II, the United States, one of the reasons why, if you guys know the movie The Memphis Belle, the B-24 Strato Fortresses, or the Super Fortresses, I think they were called, whatever, the B-24 bombers, they had a high casualty rate, right? It was really hard for them to do their 25 missions and then they could go home, right? And one of the reasons why the casualties, or why so many B-24s were shot down, was because we were doing daylight raids. The British did not have this problem because they were doing nighttime raids. So why were we doing daytime raids and the British were doing nighttime raids? We were doing daytime raids because in order for us to minimize civilian casualties, with the technology, the bomb sites, and how we could see things, we needed to do daylight bombing raids. So we risked American lives to minimize the casualties of European citizens and German citizens while at it during the World War, again, the Second World War against Germany. England, because they had been bombed indiscriminately during the siege of London and the German Luftwaffe air campaign over London and the rest of England, didn't give a fuck. They're like, we're doing nighttime and we're bombing the sites, and if we kill civilians in the process, okay, right? Because, and so that's a parallel that, people from England might be like, oh, look at Israel. Like, hey, you did that. And there's a time that the Americans, right, were so pissed off and so, had it with a certain enemy. They're like, fuck it. Fucking scorched earth, motherfucker, right? So because of that, right, and this is a very long-winded answer, the Mossad, being one of its agencies, right? It's not its only agency, but you can draw some parallels between the CIA, ISA, whatever. They are like an organization like the CIA that has more authorities, but even within their own government, in comparison, because even the CIA has some limits, right? because it is an American institution, and you still deal with the American culture, even though it is a subculture within that culture. The Mossad operates out of a different culture, and that's the Israeli culture, which has more of a stomach for doing stuff that even the CIA might be cautioned to do. So when you talk about American, like the CIA versus the Mossad, or the Mossad versus the ISA, the Mossad has probably more authorities to do stuff and get away and probably do whatever, despite collateral damage. Probably the only organization within the world that probably has more leeway and gives less fucks is probably the KGB. So the Mossad can basically do shit with the gloves off, right? So they are a very effective organization, and they have been, let's call it combat experience, right? You might call it something different for, intelligence centric organizations, but we'll just call it combat experience. They have a lot of combat experience. And so so that's what I would say when it comes to the Mossad and ISA and CIA. When you want to compare them, that's what you have to think about, is a lot of it is authorities and the culture and the stomach to do stuff. And the Mossad does a lot of shit, some stuff that we might not even do or wouldn't want to do.